Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Prose Notes, a graduate writing podcast. Today is a fantastic day. I've already said that. Nolan's back in the studio.
I'm back in the booth,
Hello.
y'all.
Hey.
Good to be back.
Does it feel natural? Does it feel good?
I missed it.
You missed it.
Yeah.
I understand. I missed it too, but I was just here. We are joined by a phenomenal human who works for the Writing Center, Rachel Andrini.
Hi.
Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, Andrini.
Andrini. Beautiful. It's such a cool name. Rachel, how are you? How have you been? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've been great. It's been a busy week for me, but I've had a lot of fun. I am a master's student in the English department at KU.
Hell yeah.
I'm in the literature and literary theory track, and I am currently working on my thesis to submit by the end of the semester. And so I'm very excited about that. Yeah.
Wow. And I also heard from a little birdie, and the birdie was
Oh,
you.
no.
that you're applying to grad school.
I am, yeah.
PhD programs.
Yep.
Oh, goodness. You're continuing on.
I am.
Why?
Yep. I like grad school. When I devote myself to a path, I tend to stick to it unless something is going horribly awry. And so it is not going horribly awry, and I am taking that as a good sign.
Hell yeah. Well, I did a PhD. Nolan's on the
I'm in one,
PhD track, so I feel like it would be hypocritical for me to say it wasn't worth it, but protect yourself.
I will.
You are also a smart, intelligent person, and you are at the Writing Center surrounded and confronted by other types of graduate writing constantly. So I feel like you have a decent leg up on some other people who may be less familiar with kind of what's to come.
Yeah, it's really fun. And it's cool because I get to see people further along in the process and get a bit of insight into that. Like, I've been working with someone who's working on publishing stuff, and so it's just like, oh, that might be me someday.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, we've got some questions for you today. We also, want to just let this conversation kind of go in the direction that you want it to go. So if you have any questions for us at any point, feel free to ask. I love a back and forth interview.
Turn the tables on us.
Yeah, turn the tables.
I'll do my
Flip it.
best if my mind pops in.
Flip the tables on us. No, there's lots of very expensive technology in here. But yeah, why don't we go ahead and jump into things? Rachel, why'd you go to grad school?
So, both incredibly straightforward story and also kind of a meandering one. I, in my undergrad, was nearing the end of my degree program, and I was actually doing kind of not writing center work, but writing consultant work with a particular group of students there, and I knew I really liked it. I liked engaging with people about their writing, and I was like, this would be really fun to do long term. And I also loved participating in classes and doing scholarship, and so I was like, wow, this might be a really good fit. And then COVID hit. I was pursuing other opportunities and had already sort of decided that regardless of what I was going to do, I'd be taking a gap year between undergrad and going into grad school if I ended up deciding to do that. But then the sort of things that I wanted to do in my gap year were also sort of undermined. I wanted to sort of get into something that involved kind of playing around with teaching and tutoring and stuff like that. That didn't happen. And so when the time came to apply for grad schools, I was like, yep, we're jumping in here because I really knew that I wanted to do something like this.
Yeah, so the gap year just reinforced the idea. That's really promising. I feel like most people take a gap year and that's the purpose of that year is to solidify that decision in some way.
Yeah, and it worked out well. I mean, it wasn't the most enjoyable year, I think, for anyone, but it was an incredible learning experience.
For anyone?
Well, I mean, that was the pandemic.
During the pandemic, sorry. I was like, what did you do to other people?
I was evil. I ruined lives.
Oh, no.
No. So it was a great learning experience and one that I don't want to return to. So
absolutely fair.
Yeah.
Maybe going off that, I'm going to change the order a little bit here because I think it's an interesting question to kind of come off this. So you planned for the gap year, didn't happen. what were like the biggest surprises to you going from undergrad to grad school?
Yeah. This is going to be a nice one, and then maybe I'll talk about some of them that are
Some
more
of the
whatever.
scary ones.
I was utterly terrified when going into grad school that it would be incredibly competitive and kind of cutthroat. And I knew that I didn't thrive well in that kind of environment. And so I was very worried about having to, this sort of catastrophic vision in my head about having to like defend my worth in the program and be like, no, I'm really good at this. I promise. Just give me some time to learn. And it turns out they sort of knew that already. And so the people in my program I found were like an incredibly wonderful community. I'm able to celebrate the wins of my friends, and they get to celebrate me. And I really appreciate that as a sort of community. I think it bolsters a lot of good learning.
Yeah, that's actually really nice. Like, I also had that where I was like really concerned that not that I would be intellectually challenged in terms of the coursework, right? But like that people were going to be like, are you like intelligent enough to be here? And like challenging my ideas in the classroom. And it's like, no, like we just read articles and talk about what we liked in the articles a lot, or like what we learned from the articles. So I was also really scared of that and have found like a good community, at least in the classrooms.
There are certainly...
But I've heard of this happening.
Yes. Oh, I have.
And maybe it's being not STEM people that we've avoided some of that or something.
I don't
want to place that on STEM. Yeah.
To generalize, and, you know, if our listeners want to fight me, that's fine. You know where to find me. But, you know, to generalize, my understanding of that kind of cutthroat nature of graduate school is it's most of the Ivies. Like, if you go to a program like the English program at, you know, Harvard, that's where the competition
status competition, yeah.
When I applied for IU Bloomington, that was one of the things I asked the graduate students who are currently enrolled. I was like, do you feel like you're competing for attention and resources and all these things? And they're like, no, we really like each other.
That's good.
And I was like, hell yeah, this is where I want to go. So I'm glad you found that here at KU.
Me too. KU really came in clutch. Yeah, and I think it's important too because when you have a space that is welcoming to you, it means that you're willing to take risks and put yourself out there, which has been a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then you had said maybe some scarier surprises or maybe more...
Well, okay, it turns out I'm a really optimistic person, so maybe not even scarier. I remember entering in my first semester and I'd be calling home, you know, talking to my parents and whatnot, and my mom would be like, it's amazing how much I can just see you learning and growing and developing.
Aww.
Like, you know, and she compared it to when I was in kindergarten, right? Like where you're suddenly in this new environment and you're encountering all this different stuff and you're kind of becoming a different person, but like in a good way.
Yeah.
And so I think in the moment I wasn't aware of just how much I was learning and how much I was doing. But from an outside perspective, I think that shocked people, or not shocked people, but it was a good sort of external feedback about who I was and how this program was engaging with who I was.
Yeah. So the two most intensely educational times of your life were kindergarten
No.
and grad school.
No. Well, I think...
I'm not making fun of you. I think that's accurate for me as well.
Well, and I think for my mom especially, that those were the moments where I was... You know, protective mama bear kind of stuff, right? You're going out and you're worried about your kid and how they're going to thrive. And so I think these were sort of the two kind of big moments where my mom was like, oh boy, I hope she's okay. And I'm going sink or swim, and I'm swimming. So
yeah, you were swimming. Of course you were. Well, and I think this conversation leads very nicely into our next question. But do you feel like, you know, KU came in clutch for you? Do you feel like you're part of the larger KU community or only part of the English department?
Kind of both. Yeah. So I think I'm very much in the English department bubble. It's where I spend a lot of my time. It's where I'm doing a lot of my work. That's where most of my peers are. But through things like teaching and the Writing Center, I have been able to engage with the broader KU community in a way that I find really valuable.
Yeah.
And so I think I have a kind of unique experience in that, in the sense that I'm participating in activities that allow me and put me in contact with people that I wouldn't otherwise have really had the means to engage with or meet. So,
yeah. Well, wonderful. I feel like it's so tricky when you're in. Actually, good question. How big is your cohort?
Oh, that is a really good question. Oh Lord, it's been a while. It's been 3 years since I first came in with that cohort. I want to say we had maybe 20 people.
Okay, interesting.
Give or take. Oh, I cannot remember exactly. But in terms of, I mean, I'm also engaging with people across, years and stuff too. And so the people who I consider sort of part of my community is broader than just the people who came in with me.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I think the point you make is like one that I identify with a lot, where like I'm in JRP all the time in the education building. I don't have time to leave the education building a lot, and so like by coming to the library and coming to the writing center, like that's where I get to like expand and like meet the other people, and I think it's a really cool space for that. And it's why if you're listening to this and are in a professional school and don't work at the writing center, you should totally come work for us, because like it's just a really concrete opportunity to engage, I think, in a really neat way with
small plug, I'm hiring,
other scholars on campus.
Yeah.
I just feel plugged into maybe parts of campus that I don't think I would otherwise. Because otherwise, like, even the teaching I do, right, and I know you as well, like, it's within the department still. Like, it's so, not isolating, but, like, there's just the time limits and the constraints on that, and it's really hard.
There are so many buildings on campus, and I think that's something that graduate students don't get to experience, is, like, literally going to other places that are not their main department and maybe, like, the building they teach or the lab they do work in. And like sometimes
I know like 6 of them.
Yeah, sometimes it's fun to kind of just explore other buildings on campus. Find a nook in a building that you wouldn't normally work in. We explored Watson a few weeks ago, and I had never really been in the stacks.
Yes.
They're gorgeous. They're cool.
The stacks, I don't typically go to the stacks to study or do work just because I have sort of an accountability buddy in my friend Jamie Hawley, who also works here. And so we usually meet in a place that's more kind of public, not quiet space kind of stuff. But those stacks look so cozy to work in.
They're so cool. They've got these like really like well-designed little nooks, and I love a good nook.
Amen.
Wonderful.
Yeah. This is kind of a change of pace then, but let's talk about your hobbies. Like, because like I think it's the reason we like this question. Like, hopefully part of your hobbies like do overlap with like graduate student work, or like you have those interests, right? But like, do you feel like you're able to connect the things you're interested in personally into like you being a scholar?
Yes, I do. I can think of 2 sort of separate examples where sort of my hobbies and interests have intersected with the work that I do in the graduate program.
Hell yeah, we love to hear it.
Yeah. One is on a pedagogical angle. So I love to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
You are amongst friends.
Yes. And it was kind of all I talked about my first year here, honestly. But I ended up creating and developing a course, again, with Jamie Hawley, that uses sort of tabletop gaming principles, like those from Dungeons and Dragons, but, non-brand specific.
Yeah, sure.
And use that to help gamify English 101 classroom. And it was really fun and I think really engaging for students. And from there, the work that I do right now in my scholarship is really looking at Victorian disability studies. And I think that when we move from the sort of traditional classroom setting to something more playful and fun, there is sort of an accessibility thing that kind of comes in there. So that kind of helps get engaged from like pedagogy to scholarship. So that's one example. And I really, really love that.
Yeah.
Another example is I love listening to podcasts.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, I know.
Newsflash,
I know. I'm living the dream. And one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, again, especially in my sort of first and second year here, was Imaginary Worlds by Eric Molinsky.
Ooh, I've never heard of this one.
Basically going into like nerdy territory.
I say I've heard of this one.
Yeah, it's so fun. And I remember listening to an episode, going, oh, that's neat, putting it aside, and then going to a class in my posthumanism class, and then having a discussion with my instructor, kind of inspired by sort of some of the thoughts that I had while listening to that podcast in relation to some of the things that we're talking about in this setting. And what that essentially allowed me to do is write a seminar paper, which then inspired my thesis.
Oh.
And so it's not, I wouldn't go so far as to say that like, I owe Imaginary Worlds my thesis, but
you could absolutely say that.
But it was certainly part of like it certainly influenced the things that I was thinking at that time and how I was engaging with class content.
You can acknowledge them in your acknowledgments.
Yeah, I'll put it and be like, thanks, Eric. We're on first name basis. You don't know that, but we are.
You don't know me, but thank you. You've changed my life.
It's not parasocial. But no, yeah, like I think, and that's a cool thing about like English departments maybe, that like in education, I don't know that I always get the chance to bring in like those interests. I think I could come up with like a pedagogical reason maybe, but like media, right, is part of things in an English department, and you can really weave those things in. So it's always really cool to hear the opportunities that you two have had that I'm like, oh, I wish.
Now, in that conversation with your professor, did you mention the podcast while you were weaving these ideas?
I can't remember. I think I might have mentioned it vaguely. You know, I think I might have said something along the lines of, I was listening to this podcast that was talking about a bit of kind of stepping back in terms of the context that was going on there. We were talking a lot about post-humanism, and the class itself was very critical of transhumanism, which I also lean into. But the podcast that was talking about it, the episodes were about transhumanism and the way that was engaging with stuff. And the KU Common Book at that time was Disability Visibility.
Right, yeah.
And so I was really just trying to understand, how are we differentiating these terms? What do they mean? How does that engage with sort of some of the broader conversations around disability specifically? It wasn't anything in particular that was like, oh, this is what this episode says, I'm going to like cite from it, but more just a problem posing sort of jumping point. So
yeah. Well, I mostly am curious because I feel like, as Nolan just said, there's a lot of media exposure and overlap, and I think the work that literary folks and humanists do, and it's not always kosher or acceptable to like quote those things or cite those things.
You can't admit to it.
Yeah, you can't admit that your entire senior thesis in undergrad was based on Full Metal Alchemist, but
oh boy,
but it kind of
but it was, and it worked, and I'm sure it was awesome.
Yeah, it was great. But I think there is so much like beautiful overlap in those things, and of course, I feel like the smartest and most interesting tabletop RPG folk are people who know how to think in these very critical, almost like literary forms. There's a reason why, like, having a liberal arts degree is actually good.
I would agree with that. I like it.
I think it's great. I actually think this kind of conversation about the writing that you're doing and how you're kind of weaving your hobbies into the scholarship that you're working on leads very nicely into our next question, which is, what do you like about writing in your field? And then what do you not like about it?
Yeah. I enjoy close reading, which is very great for someone in the English sort of field. And I guess just for some context, if people aren't familiar with like that term specifically, close reading is basically another way of talking about like inductive reasoning that we use with texts, where you are taking something very, very specific and looking at what it means with an incredible amount of detail. And that's really fun for me. I like to sort of pick things apart and see how they work. It's what I'm learning to do right now. I can either close read or I can talk broad picture, but combining the two can sometimes be hard for me to balance. But that's something that I've been working on. I mean, I was aware of this issue just within my own little self-reflection back in undergrad. So it's been something that I've been trying to work towards. And I think I'm kind of getting to a point where I'm getting better with that. So that's good.
Wonderful.
I'm trying to think about things that I don't particularly like about it. I mean, I think sometimes the writing process is hard. And I think that's just general, like that's an experience that a lot of people have, which resonates with me. To that point, it's not necessarily about writing in my field particularly, but I think there's a real pressure to feel like you've done something productive when writing. And so sometimes when I, am not producing words on a page, it doesn't feel like I've accomplished anything when, maybe I've read some important sources or done other work. And so it's hard to put value on the work that I'm doing sometimes, which can be difficult.
Yeah. You mentioned this earlier when you were talking about like having those conversations with your mom, and she was kind of observing you growing and becoming this kind of new intellectual person. But I distinctly remember conversations I had with my mom when I was in grad school where I was like, I'm so tired. And she's like, why? What did you do? And I was like, well, I read all day. And she's like, why is that tiring? And I was like, I get it. Like intellectual work is work. It's exhausting. You're kind of like done by the end of the day. Reading for 8 hours, reading like tough, like academic text, dense, jargony bullshit. It's gonna tire you out, and it's really hard to explain to people that like even if you're not like running 3 miles, that you're still kind of wiped after doing that kind of work.
Yeah, for sure. More than once I've fallen asleep with like an article in my hand or something. Like that just like happens. It's harder than I think people think, because you're like, oh, you're just sitting there reading. It's like, no, I'm trying to understand this like really complicated concept that's new to me. It's hard. Yeah. I feel that.
Your brain's
And the worst part is I signed up for it.
Amen.
Yeah, but we didn't realize.
No one told me.
I feel like Rachel's the only person here who is like, I know why I'm doing this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just know it's a good fit for me because I'm such a, I'm a nerd in a way that thrives in this particular kind of environment.
Yeah. And I want you to thrive.
Thank you.
We're so happy that you're thriving.
We're so happy that you're thriving.
We actually mean that. That sounded really facetious.
No. I didn't read it that way.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
So then coming off of like writing and what you do and don't like how much writing do you actually do? Because like that's the thing I think about, like especially in education department, like I'm not writing every week necessarily.
Yeah.
There's a discussion post maybe, but like the papers, there's the writing process, but I'm not expected to produce a text every week, where I know folks in the English department might be more prone. So what does your week as a writer look like?
Yeah. So that's also a bit complicated to answer, just because right now especially I'm in more of a thesis kind of hours in writing.
Yeah.
When I was taking kind of full-on coursework, it would also probably depend on whether or not I was doing seminar work, because I think especially in seminar classes, you tend to be doing a lot of reading throughout the semester with maybe a few sort of smaller assignments intermixed, and then the big thing is at the end. And the big thing for the English department tends to be somewhere between 20 and 30 pages.
Okay.
When we're talking more lower level non-seminar classes and graduate classes, we would have, I want to say, sort of smaller writing chunks, but more of them. I would say more like 12 kind of being the big kind of page number thing at the end, and then a couple of more kind of smaller scale writing stuff in between there.
Okay.
And then, also discussion board posts, you could generally expect that. If you count writing notes in class, that might be something. So,
yeah.
And I mean, kind of picking up from what I was saying before, I think there's a difference between doing writing and engaging in the writing process.
Yeah.
And so, there's some
it's
of that stuff.
more than just the pen to paper.
Yeah.
There's the productive element of that, but then there's also the brainstorming and the planning and the researching version of that. How do you've got a lot on your plate. You're currently in your kind of thesis mode. How do you take care of yourself? What are ways that you're kind of filling your bucket?
So that's something I'm still working on. No, I mean, in a good way.
She's thriving.
I am thriving. I am also a human. I have sort of learned over time different things that are sort of necessary for me. One thing, so my sister recently moved out of a sort of the family hometown, which means that I think there's been a more concerted effort recently on the part of all my family members to do family dinners. And so thank you, Zoom. We have like a weekly family dinner on Tuesdays where we
really
eat and talk at the same time. And it's just nice because that was a tradition of ours growing up. Like that, we really valued that. And so having, at least a facsimile of that is really nice.
Yeah.
I try my best to sort of have on and off hours so that when I get home or after a certain time, I'm sort of saying I'm not going to look at that anymore. I mean, and you know, it's hard to maintain that sometimes. Sometimes things just need to happen when they need to happen, but that works.
Yeah.
And then I just try to pursue kind of fun opportunities. Again, I play D&D.
Yeah.
I
So
will sometimes go to events. Yeah. Oh, well, it depends on the campaign you're in, really. But yeah. So I just try to sort of maintain my friendships and relationships the best I can, and take advantage of some of the fun opportunities that come when they arise. So, and I try to remind myself that just because I feel stressed and just because I feel like, you know, I don't have enough time for things, I likely do. I just need to, you know, pencil it in and then say, all right, I'm going to be doing that fun thing. So let's prepare so that we can enjoy that fun thing. And that usually gives me some incentive.
Oh, my little anxious heart is so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
That was not a healthy perspective I had of like, there's so much I have to do and I don't have enough time. And I never took a step back and said, maybe I do have enough time to do all of these things.
I'll also say, okay, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here.
Go for it. It's a podcast.
True. I, for so long, was able to operate out of a planner, and it would work so well for me. And then sometime during my grad program, or even maybe during that gap year, that just fell off. It could not make it work for me. It was not working. And so I've switched things up. I've got an online planner on my phone, using Google Calendar. I've got a little to-do list thing off on the side that I can use to keep track of things that need to be kept track of. And I also I got this thing for Christmas, and it's called the Anti-Planner, which is actually made for people with ADHD. I'm not diagnosed with ADHD. I don't think I have it, but it's useful for, I think, for anyone. And it's just about
universal design, baby.
Yeah. And it's about, okay, if you're feeling unmotivated, if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling, and so you just flip and you find activities that can just help you tackle the thing that needs to get done. And so I found that really helpful too.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
I feel like we may not be diagnosed with ADHD, but, I feel like we all kind of suffer from the motivation difficulties and the executive functioning issues that, people with ADHD really struggle with. And I've seen tips and tricks online of using a D20 to set your agenda for the day. Just all right, I got 20 things I need to do. Roll a dice. What does the dice tell me to do today? If you like that structure, if you like Dungeons & Dragons or tabletop role playing games, can be a very fun way of just kind of gamifying your
Turn everything into a quest.
Yeah, it's a quest. And I think as somebody who works for the Writing Center, who's kind of deep into the thesis writing, are you finding that you're sharing your writing with other people? Are you getting kind of other eyes on the document? Or how do you kind of view feedback within your writing?
Yeah. I love getting feedback. Well, we've talked a bit. In the Writing Center, we talk about this sort of a little grid, right? High risk, low reward.
Yeah. The feedback grid, yeah.
Yes, the feedback grid. I consider myself someone who is high risk, high reward, which is very funny. I'm not a gambler at all. I hate it in every other aspect of my life. But some kind feedback can push me a long way, and some constructive feedback can really help me develop things further.
Yeah.
I don't usually feel comfortable sharing things until I feel like I have at least a draft. I want to make enough changes so that they're pointing out things that I myself might not have noticed, or, kind of having that sort of perspective on it. I don't share a lot outside that context. Right now, most of what I've been doing has been with my advisor.
Okay.
But I have done the Writing Center writing groups in the past, which has been really helpful. And I have visited the Writing Center for other sort of projects.
Yeah.
I just haven't gone to, and I actually plan to go to the Writing Center to go over some of my instructors' feedback just to get some outside eyes on it. But I haven't reached that part in my writing process yet.
Gotcha.
So
Right.
But that's good. I mean, you know from working here that feedback is valuable, and it sounds like you're at least understanding your writing process to include feedback in a very intentional way. Because sometimes we don't, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
Well, and I've been thinking a lot about it more because these are questions that we ask every time we have this interview, or we like to ask them during the interview. And it's a thing I know you are thinking a lot about as a scholar and administrator in the Writing Center. But like, and this is just coming to me now, but like, I think a lot of it is just having that healthy relationship with feedback. And that can look so different for so many people. And what I was thinking about when you're talking about like hobbies and interests and just how you take care of yourself, like in grad school, you have to know yourself, or you come to know yourself. And there's lots of other avenues in life to get to know yourself, but boy, is it a way to really look yourself in the mirror. And so like navigating that process of like, what does it look like for me to receive comments, and how do I navigate that? Because as RJ talked about in her episode, right, she like shares instructor feedback like with other people in the classroom, which was just a really cool thing that neither of us, I think, had ever really heard about. And so just having that healthy, positive relationship and what it looks like for you, and it sounds like you kind of have that, I think is really, really cool to see people construct for themselves, which I guess is a long-winded way to get into the next question of just like, how is instructor feedback for you? So you're working on a thesis and you're working closely with your advisor. How is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, long story short, I like it. I am, I think, very lucky and very blessed to have a good relationship with my advisor. She has been remarkably encouraging and has provided a lot of really great direction for me. And honestly, most of the feedback that I'm getting is like, you're trying to bite off more than you can chew, which is very on brand. So yeah, it's been nice. And I think one of the things that is really helpful is she'll provide sort of general feedback based off of my writing itself, which is great just because she's got sort of an expertise in sort of the things that I'm trying to do. But she's also very receptive to me asking questions about my specific concerns. I was there and asking questions about like, can I use Chicago style if I don't want to use MLA? And she's like, yeah, that's fine. Small things that are maybe a little less maybe important in the long run, but, matter to me. And so that's been nice.
Well, and that flexibility and ownership that you can take over your writing with your advisor, I think is very healthy because, there are a lot of graduate students on this campus who may not have the best relationship with their advisor and may feel like their project really isn't theirs because they're getting all of this feedback that's like, do this, do this, do this. And all of a sudden it's like not really the project they envision. So I'm glad you're like, it's yours. You feel like it's developing in a way that makes sense for you, but you're still getting that expertise from somebody who like knows the field.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's been really helpful. I appreciate it. And another thing that I find really helpful, and it's maybe not so much about her feedback, but I mean, I told her point stop. I was like, I need deadlines. If I do not have deadlines, this isn't going to work for me because I'm not going to be productive. And so like we're in communication about when I want stuff done, and I have like a schedule laid out for like, this is when you should expect things from me. If I'm not doing that, I'll either let you know and why, or we'll have to readjust. So that's been helpful too.
That's great. That's really good to hear. Self-implemented deadlines work, people. You just have to stick to them.
It's great when it's enforced by someone else too.
Yeah.
Get that external pressure going.
External friendly peer pressure is very important in graduate school. It shouldn't be toxic, but it should be pressure.
Well, because it's a form of like accountability, right? Like, being sure to like follow through and like talking about knowing oneself. I'm that same way. I need someone to just like set a deadline. Otherwise, it's not going to get done. And I'm happy to have the deadline. Like, that's just how I operate. So
yeah. Well, I kind of want to come back to something you mentioned earlier when you were talking about like care and taking care of yourself. And this is not in our question, so I hope it's okay if I ask this.
Go for it.
What is your like family history with higher ed? Does your family have higher ed degrees? Are you kind of like, were they aware of what you were doing, or?
Yeah. Well, and what I can say to that is this is another place where I've been incredibly privileged. It's because my mom and my dad both have master's degrees.
Whoa, nice.
And my mom actually works in higher ed.
Oh,
so
lovely.
she, and even better, she's a career counselor or works in the career center. And so she's been able to offer a lot of guidance throughout my life about, career kind of life path anxieties. So, yeah, and she has a lot of insight into higher ed. So that's something that I've been really lucky with.
Yeah.
It took historically, I would say it took, my dad went through a couple of different programs just through undergrad and to the master's degree. Mm-hmm. I hope it's okay for me to share. It's fine. And he was doing that sort of specifically more towards like a particular field or job path that he wanted, which is also sort of what I'm doing. But it is interesting to me, I think, one of the things that it's fun to sort of experience when I'm talking to other grad students through my work at the Writing Center is to be like, oh, yeah, there are so many career paths that exist here. I'm here for one particular reason, but that is not representative necessarily of why people are in grad programs. Yeah. And so that also, I think my dad's experiences and my mom's experiences both sort of provide some of that perspective for me too.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so I guess kind of coming off that, at the top of the episode, right, you talked about wanting to continue to the next step. So maybe I want to talk maybe a bit about like the scholarship you're thinking about at the PhD level and kind of what it is for you as you're looking at these programs. And are you applying here to KU?
I am going to talk about the process to the PhD program. I might avoid talking about the schools and the specifics.
Totally fair.
Just because. But yeah, I am interested in sort of continuing looking at Victorian disability studies.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I really, really, really love Victorian studies, and I think there's a lot of really great moments for intersectionality, both in terms of like the history, but also like the theoretical frameworks that we can apply. Last semester, I took a class on book history or the history of the book, and I really, 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 really love looking at some of the more formal choices surrounding books, like the construction of the book or the medium that we're engaging with. And so even some of like the narrative forms and content. And so I think it'd be fun to explore sort of disability in the Victorian era through that lens of like physical form or narrative form. I know those are two different things, but they're related in my head.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so that is, I think, where I'd like to go with that. And even cooler is, I think, would be to look at how like adaptions of Victorian literature in like modern kind of mediums and how those shifting forms between the early novel to what we've got today.
Yeah.
Using an example, there's like that Dracula podcast, where they put out the entries, the journal entries in chronological order. And the way that shifts both in terms of listening and sort of the episodic kind of release.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm using that as an example, not necessarily as like the thing I want to study, but looking at that sort of transformation of medium and form as it's sort of conversing with disability.
Yeah, because the Victorian era was known for that, like the like weekly updates for novels and
the serialization
and so you didn't get your binge reading of Dickens. You had to wait.
yes which is very similar to some of the mediums that we have today, just not necessarily in book form. Well, sometimes in book form, but usually online in that case. So it's fun.
And Netflix is going back to the serialization format. They're not just releasing binge series anymore, which is interesting. So your research is coming back into vogue.
I'm on top of things. I'm trendy.
You're on the cusp of something new and cool. Incredible. Rachel, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would tell your old self or even tell other grad students to how to make it through?
Yeah. 1, ask for help when you need it. That can involve talking to instructors. That can involve talking to grad students. That can just involve venting if you need to. There's a lot of different forms of help that exist in the world, and it is okay to advocate for yourself. That is important.
Yeah.
Amen.
And yeah. I would also, on a similar vein, maybe, and I'm going to do that. I can't remember who says this, but it's very iconic, that you miss all the shots you don't take. I am prone to self-sabotage. And so I'm very proud of myself for pursuing opportunities here that I was very, very, very afraid of taking for fear of rejection or all sorts of other things. And sometimes I didn't get what I, wanted or went for, but I also did get a lot of what I did go for. Yeah. And so, success or failure, it's still, the effort is still worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what my third piece would be.
I do love how your second piece of advice is very true to me right now, which is just the worst that can happen is somebody says no to you.
And it's so dreadful. Like it's so easy to build it up in your head.
Yeah. The worst that can happen is that they say no.
Well, and I think especially because a lot of times our self-worth gets wrapped up into how other people value our work, and the perceived rejection feels like more than just a rejection of that particular thing.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's not.
You're good. You're good at what you do. You're here.
You're smart. You're so smart.
Yeah. And then I know I sound like I'm really good at taking care of myself. I'm not. I mean, do what you can to manage your time and make engagements with people. Build your community because that community is what's going to get you through.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think those are wonderful. And like kind of like you said, like it can be hard at times to like take our own advice. And so like I really like this question to get people to be like, oh, like I should do what I'm telling myself.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, and it's fun to talk about this grad school stuff, we work for the Writing Center. And so I think a great question to just kind of wrap stuff up on, to kind of encapsulate lots of the stuff we've been talking about is, what's your personal philosophy of writing? Like, what is it? What does it mean to you?
So in my teaching statement, bear with me, I like to practice what I preach, ideally.
Yeah.
And so I really do like to think of like the classroom as a workshop. And so I really like to think of my own writing as a craft, which I think is a good metaphor just because it is something that I continually try to build skills on and improve on. And it is also something where I can look at other people's work and get inspired by. And so I think that's really fun. Also, I think sort of, again, that workshop metaphor works really well because when it comes to the writing process, it really does involve a lot of tinkering, trying things, figuring out what works and what doesn't, getting feedback, a la the Writing Center and other good resources. And that is all just there to help you communicate to a specific audience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I like it like that. I also just think, writing is important and being able to communicate is important, just like on a more broad skill level. That's an important skill to have, regardless of whether you are in a graduate program or in a professional environment or, whatever. And so I think that's also helpful to think about. I try to really think about who I am writing for and making sure that I'm clear. Sometimes I use big annoying words. I've been like that since I was young. And so it's helpful when someone's like, what did you mean? And I'll be like, oh gosh. So yeah.
Apologizing for using jargon because you're like, oh no, you don't know what I'm saying, but like in a very like sincere way.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes, okay, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but I mean, what's very interesting to me is the things that I now consider standard common knowledge, or maybe standard and common knowledge in my field of like Victorian studies specifically, but so it's easy to feel like I haven't accomplished anything because I'm like, oh, well, this is stuff that we already know. That's not true. When you're talking to the average person, there's a lot of work of contextualizing that has to get done, which both shows just how much you actually do learn in the graduate program, but it also demonstrates some of the work that you need to do when you're explaining to a wider audience.
It's so interesting that you say that because I feel like one of the things I did during my PhD that kind of helped me think about that audience question was like instead of writing for my advisor, and I was, I'm that my committee was my main audience, but I was like, this is actually for my mom. So how do I need to write this in a way that my mom will understand? And that really helped me to like break down those really complex topics that I was trying to figure out and like, literally define my terms in a way that I feel like I wouldn't have if I was just writing for all of these English faculty that, were my main audience. So absolutely, right for the layman.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Rachel, this has been absolutely delightful.
Just wonderful.
What a romp.
Thank you. It was good to see you guys.
Yeah,
it's fun.
It was fun to hang out with you. Any other quip? Any other? Actually, no. I have one question because as you were describing your philosophy, I just picked up on something. Do you play artificer classes in D&D?
I do not,
Okay,
but
interesting.
I was very tempted in the most recent campaign.
Because you're a tinkerer.
I'm a tinkerer. No, I typically, the ones that I've gone to the most are clerics and bards.
That makes a lot of sense.
English people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, this has been a really good time. It's just, I always enjoy doing these interviews. They're just really fun. And writing is a workshop. Maybe life is too. I think that was a really good one. Yeah, it was awesome. So
You heard it here first, folks. Life is a workshop.
thanks for listening, y'all.
Thanks for listening, everyone. As always, happy writing.
Happy writing.
Happy writing. Goodbye.